We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's October 23rd here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yoon, and you're watching News Generation, where we discuss the latest issues concerning our generation. Joining me in the studio is Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And Al Song.
Good morning.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s and share their own insights. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. It's no doubt that Korean food has blown up so much around the world. Last year, the Korean Food Promotion Institute surveyed foreigners and found out that Korean-style chicken, specifically, was the most popular dish in Korea. That's why we've seen K-chicken franchises like BBQ launch around 700 stores in 57 different countries. And by the year 2030, they plan to expand this number to 50,000. Korean-style bakery goods and burgers are also getting much popularity, as we're seeing hundreds of franchise stores launched around the world. And moving on, over in the Israel-Hamas war, a second convoy of aid trucks entered the Rafah crossing from the Egyptian side into the Gaza Strip on Sunday night. The first batch of much-needed supplies aboard 20 trucks entered the Gaza Strip on Saturday. Distribution did start on Sunday, but aid officials warned of a major humanitarian disaster as food, water, and fuel runs low. UN officials say at least 100 trucks would be needed a day to cover urgent needs in Gaza. And lastly, some news related to Korea. Seoul City's education office has found that the number of students in the capital receiving counseling for dyslexia has jumped sevenfold in the last 3 years. The exact figure in August was 824. Most were elementary school students, and experts believe this is mainly because the pandemic has stripped students of the opportunity to go to the classroom and meet their friends. Now, dyslexia is a learning disability in reading, and though people do not outgrow it, there are many teaching approaches and strategies that experts suggest can be adopted from a young age to help people improve their reading skills. So here in the studio, what did you guys think about this news story?
I mean, it's just, it's sad that so many kids had to go through this because of the pandemic, and it's definitely something caused by us adults, but, in the end, the children are suffering for it. And I heard that if you're covering your mouth and your kind of lower half of the face, it actually stunts and it doesn't help with the reading, learning how to read. And on the other hand, I am glad that they're getting the help that they need, and dyslexia, like we mentioned, is something that you need to get it diagnosed early on to help with your schoolwork. So I hope that even in the future, if there are kids, not just from the pandemic, who do get diagnosed with dyslexia, they would be able to get the help they need.
Right, and Seoul Metropolitan Office is actually trying its best to not only counsel these students, but also find them at a very young age, because as we mentioned before, it's really important that they take premature measures. What are your thoughts on this story?
Yeah, like Niall said, there seems to be a lot of long-term effects from COVID-19, especially for the younger generation and that, I guess, development period where they're learning a lot. It's not just reading, though. I also heard that it's got to do with communication in general, because they aren't able to see the person's face or lip movement or expressions. Having a daughter, it does worry me, of course, but I was quite lucky that she was born just after the restrictions were eased off. However, saying that, though, I do have a lot of friends who had COVID babies, so to speak, and they're afraid of what it's going to do for them long term in schools, which are already very competitive.
Right, and that was our news feed for this Monday. Let's now switch gears to our main discussion topic of the day. So today we're going to be talking about how Chinese state media reported back in September that North Korea is seemingly open to the idea of allowing the entry of foreigners. Now, this is the first time the reclusive regime has decided to do that since the COVID-19 pandemic. And to find out more on whether you can also go, take a look at the screen. But from today, I'm going to be using my AI voice secretary to introduce our main topic of the day through a video.
After years of closing itself off to the world, North Korea has reportedly approved the reopening of its borders. That's according to China's state broadcaster CCTV, which said in September that Pyongyang authorities are now allowing foreigners to enter North Korea after a 2-day quarantine period upon arrival. Details as to whether this includes foreigners who want to visit for tourism purposes haven't been revealed. As of now, it seems to be open mostly for diplomatic delegations. The North has closed off its borders for 3 years and 8 months as part of a national emergency disease control system. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, the regime had suspended all international air, train, and ocean travel in and out of North Korea.
So from today on News Generation, every single time we introduce a main news topic, that will be my AI voice secretary doing all the talking. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, I didn't think that it sounded very different from the regular one, so I guess you've been doing a really good job at being almost mechanically professional, and it sounds great.
All right, what about you, Walter?
Well, I think it was flawless as a person who follows AI as well. I guess you're gonna not have a job in a few years.
I hope not. I hope not. Only my AI voice secretary would be doing the main discussion introductory video, but the rest, I will be doing that. Now, for the first time in more than 3 years, North Korea is seemingly opening up its borders for foreigners to visit. And one of our producers on NewsGen actually had the opportunity to visit the border between China and North Korea. And let's take a look at the footage he filmed. If you take a look at the screen, you can find out what North Korea looks like these days. And while we look at the footage, we're going to be reading into the latest measure of how they opened up their borders. So take a look at the screen to find out what North Korea looks like these days. So if we have the video ready in hand, you can see in a few seconds, that's what North Korea looks like. But Walter,
yes.
What can we read into the fact that North Korea reopened its borders for foreigners?
Okay, yeah, well, obviously another pandemic issue was made, which is, the borders were closed in North Korea, which left a lot of North Korean citizens, students, athletes, and diplomats stuck in either surrounding China or Russia or even other areas of the world. I mean, now they are able to return, but many are actually very worried about what could happen to them on their return. And I know Naya will bring something up in a second. However, I guess with these borders opening up, the only positive sound that I can see is the return of foreign delegations and their embassies, which they had to close during COVID because they weren't able to rotate staff. People couldn't go in and out. And so hopefully with these embassies up and running again, there can be, maybe a bit of a more clear connection between North Korea and other countries around the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, like Walter was mentioning earlier, concerns for additional violation of human rights as North Korea, starting around 2020, has placed many policies for, information and ideology censorship. And so when these North Korean defectors or people go back into the country, it may lead straight to their punishment, unfortunately. And the law right now prohibits conversing or exchanges of any kind between North Korean nationals and outsiders. They're very secluded. So it's kind of considered a threat when these people who left the country, who's interacted with other people, come back. And I think this adds to the concern, but as we were looking at in the video, it's just a little bit of water and you can cross into North Korea. It's so close. So a lot of people, there's a lot of North Korean defectors that cross into China. But China has recently allowed for legal usage of weapons against North Korean defectors, and I think that's kind of concerning.
That's definitely an issue we'll be looking at. And if you keep looking at the screen, these are the borders from China and North Korea, right? And as of now, North Korean officials didn't reiterate the fact that they would open up its borders, to who specifically, and whether this is also open for tourism. We'll have to see what happens. But because they don't have a separate Ministry of Tourism, or they're not that open with their information, it was quite nice to see what our producer filmed because we could get a glimpse of it. Because
I love that.
Yeah, South Korean or U.S. passport holders can't go in there. So I think a lot of our viewers had a chance to look at what it would look like now. Now, let's move on to our second part of the discussion. Following this announcement of the North reopening its borders, I hear that some defectors, whether they were in China, were actually sent back to the North. Is that true, though?
Yeah, after the Asian Games, North Korea human rights activist group claimed that around 600 North Korean defectors who were detained in China were sent back to North Korea. And the Korean Ministry of Unification confirmed that the number and the identities of these people are unknown, but the repatriation is indeed true.
Oh, I see. And Walter, would you like to add on?
Yeah, so the Korean government is keeping obviously a constant interest in the issue of the North Korean defectors. The South Korean government says that North Korean defectors staying abroad should not be forcibly repatriated against their free will. And the UN Refugee Convention has a principle of prohibiting forced repatriation. So they're really looking out for these North Korean defectors.
Right, the reopening of borders is shedding light to a pressing issue, which is humanitarian issues. And it's been a while since we actually talked about North Korea-related issues here on News Generation. Where are we in terms of dealing with the North? What do our North Korean-related policies look like at the moment?
So with the change of the administration, there is a change, obviously, in the North Korean policies. I believe the previous administration was trying to, be a bit more friendly with them. This one seems to be a bit different. For the current government, they are focused on the Korea-US alliance more so. And the South Korean government are very clear on their intentions with Korea, Japan, and the US. They have reduced support towards North Korea, as far as I know, in regards to, let's say, donations. So at the moment, we're in a quite awkward stalemate.
I see. Al?
Yeah, and obviously there's two sides to everything, and like we were mentioning, the previous government and the current one, but both the ruling and the opposition party are split on the North Korean policies at the moment. The opposing party criticizes the lack of communication in the current administration, but the ruling party's views are that the communication and the efforts for peace with North Korea is actually a threat to national security.
Right, and that's definitely an issue that we need to be talking about more. Now, I would like to find out whether the North opening up its borders could actually boost inter-Korean relations, and let's do that by including an expert in our talks. We're now going to include a North Korea affairs expert. He's currently hosting a podcast on NK News. It's Jocko Zwetslut. Welcome, Jocko.
Good morning, and thanks for having me on the show.
Hello.
All right, so we're going to go around and ask you a question each. My first question is, how has the North closing itself off to the world affected the livelihoods of its own residents, and how are North Koreans living at the moment?
Economically speaking, North Korea is actually more polarized than South Korea in some ways. Those who are rich in North Korea, we're talking about the so-called donju or money masters, they're less rich than their counterparts in South Korea. But those who are poor and are struggling to put food on the table are generally much worse off than the bottom rung in South Korean society. Markets are tolerated in North Korea by the government, but only to a certain extent. And most means of production, we're talking about resources like land, labor, machinery, still belong to the state and are allocated by the state, meaning that it's difficult to engage in large-scale private enterprise. Small-scale businesses were possible to a certain extent before the COVID pandemic because of a lot of informal, irregular trade cross-border with China. But that border shut, as we know, in January 2020, and has only just been opened since this summer. So those who relied on direct or indirect trade in imported goods really suffered for the last 3.5 years. Now, China gives enough resources to the North Korean state to keep the lights on, but not enough for the economy to thrive and grow. In fact, there was some reporting earlier this year that there's a food crisis in some parts of North Korea with people undernourished, some wasting, stunting, and even, if you believe the most extreme reports that are hard to verify, starvation in rural areas. So we won't know the full extent of this until international NGOs, aid agencies, and embassies start going back into North Korea. As you said, the border with China is open again, and in fact, NK News reported that North Korea's trade across the border with China grew for 4 straight months up to September, and the September figure was at a nearly 4-year high. But it's probably those state-owned enterprises and military-related companies that will see the profits of that trade first. The small traders and the market stallholders will be some way down that chain of distribution. And with North Korea and China's increased border security on both sides, I think it'll be hard for some of them to build up their informal trade networks and supply chains again. The Republic of Korea, the Bank of Korea here in South Korea believes that North Korea's GDP fell by 0.2% in real terms, but the International Credit Rating Agency, Fitch's, actually sees it growing this year up to 1%. So it's a little bit unclear. We're waiting for more information.
Thank you for that really detailed answer. Like, I hear before borders were closed off, many North Korean residents had access to South Korean cultural products. We're talking K-pop songs and drama series recorded on a disc. Is this true? And tell us a little bit more about how North Korean residents could get a hold of South Korean cultural content.
Yes, it is true that some North Koreans have access or who have had access to South Korean cultural products. We're talking about K-pop music, dramas and movies. We don't have a very good picture of what percentage of North Korean people living in which areas have come into contact, but generally it's the ones living in border areas and also in the capital of Pyongyang. Actually, in February this year, a North Korean refugee wrote a fascinating Ask a North Korean column on the NK News website called What Was It Like to Listen to K-pop for the First Time? So I encourage you to go and check that out. What we know for sure is that consuming culture from South Korea has to be done in secret, because spreading South Korean pop culture is forbidden by North Korean law with some very strong punishments. Before the pandemic, that content went in by two major ways. Firstly, traders would bring in USB drives or SD or micro SD cards from China. And they used to bring in CD-ROMs, but these were bigger and easier to find by the North Korean security agencies. So they've been replaced by these smaller media, like the micro SD cards. And they're often sold in the informal local marketplaces or jangmadang. Once the border with China was closed during the pandemic, it was almost impossible to get this kind of information across from China because there's no internet. So another way that it gets in is South Korean activists who send USBs over the demilitarized zone with balloons against the wishes of the South Korean government. Some of these USBs end up in the hands of the North Korean people and can then be copied and spread. And so this continued to a certain limited extent during the pandemic. But the thing about spreading such materials is, as I said, it's dangerous, it is forbidden. Some people can even be punished with execution for spreading what is seen as imperialist and anti-state material. But it does happen in these jangmadang marketplaces through networks of people who trust each other, like family members and very close friends. And now that the border with China is open again, we may see that trade increase once more.
Wow. Wow, so speaking of Jangmadang, there's many experts who refer to North Korea's younger generation as the Jangmadang generation, kind of like how in Korea we say MZers, combining Millennials and Gen Z for the 20s and 30s. What exactly are some distinctive traits, because I'm sure they have them, behind North Koreans' Jangmadang generation?
Yes, the jangmadang generation, meaning literally the marketplace generation, has been around for quite a while now in North Korea. The first cohort of this group went through their childhood in the arduous march. That's the North Korean name for the big famine that took place in the mid-1990s. So we're talking about a cohort that reached adulthood in the mid-2000s or the mid-noughties. And they're a generation who did not know the public distribution system of rations received from the state. Instead, they grew up knowing that if you want something, you have to buy it with money, preferably foreign currency, at a marketplace, this jangmadang, or at a shop. So that's the first characteristic of the jangmadang generation. And they've been around now for over 15 years, and each year their number keeps growing because more children come of age and join their ranks who only know that to buy things you've got to have money and you've got to do it in a marketplace. So as well as their understanding of basic market principles of supply and demand and the value of money, the jangmadang generation has also been exposed, as I said in the earlier part, to South Korean and other world cultures through the USB discs and the
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but due to time, I would like to briefly ask you then. It feels like there's a lot of commonalities between South Korean millennials and Gen Z with North Korea's Jangmadang generation. In a sentence or two, could you tell us how you would forecast for our generations to combine together and better facilitate inter-Korean relations then?
Oh, well, comparing South Korean Generation MZ to the North Korean Jangmadang kids is really difficult because their life experiences are so different. The average North Korean person is struggling to make ends meet, while the average young person in South Korea is trying to get into a good university and then travel overseas before getting a good job. So the needs are very different. But of course, young people, they have hopes and dreams and hopefully haven't become disillusioned yet. So they're engaged on both sides of the DMZ in a very competitive struggle in their respective societies. So they've got competition in common, but in terms of better North-South inter-Korean relations, I really think that the former President Moon gave it his best shot, and North Korea's leadership still decided to cut off communication. So it's hard to see better inter-Korean relations until North Korea has better relations with the whole world, including the United Nations and all of its near and far neighbors.
Right, and
absolutely.
hopefully the reopening of its borders could maybe pave a pathway for North Korea to actually step up to the international arena, but we'll have to see, I guess.
Indeed, we better not count our chickens before they hatch.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Jocko. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and to further expand on our conversation with Jocko, we asked our viewers to share their thoughts and hopes for what our generation can do to foster better inter-Korean relations. Take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them had to say. Tasmia said, I want the people of North Korea to live a stable lifestyle. They're humans too, just like us. Angel said, get rid of the antiquated imperialistic mindset and put their people first. They need foreign trade routes for prosperity instead of a poor, isolated country. Terrace Bell said, I would like to see their mindset be more open to the idea of peaceful reunification, but in a short term, maybe a formal end to the war. And I think the last question I would like to ask you guys now is how can we foster a better relationship between the North and the South here in the peninsula, starting with you now?
It's such a tricky matter, and I don't think, it's not easy, but I believe that as we were talking about the younger generation, despite being different, 장마당 and MZers, but I do feel like as we're taking the stage, there needs to be more of a heart-to-heart and a good communication, but of course, everything I just said is a very idealistic
It's very,
answer.
yeah.
So to simplify, I'll just say better communication for the future.
What about you, Walter?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Niall. I mean, the whole situation, the hostility between the 2 countries at the moment doesn't feel good. And given what's happening around the world, it's quite scary to be living here right now anyway.
And I think the conclusion we have every single time we talk about North Korea here on NewsGen is we need to make sure there's a division between politics and humanitarian
Absolutely.
issues. Because at the end of the day, as also Jocko mentioned, it's the human beings living in there and their livelihoods are affected. So hopefully we could foster better discussions so that their livelihoods are protected. In the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And now Song.
No problem.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.